Hey class, and for this unit, we're gonna cover cultura, which is culture, and because this class concentrates on the Latinx or Chicanese community, we're gonna talk about español, Spanish. ¿Hablas español? Do you speak Spanish? Well, check this out. The US is now the second largest Spanish speaking country. Yes, there are more Spanish speakers in the US than, let's say, Colombia, Argentina. Mexico has a population of about 120 million, but in the US, we have about 41 million native speakers, and there are about 11 million more who are not native speakers, but they do speak Spanish. That's crazy. So we add that up, we're looking at 51 million people in the US. That's why we are saying that it's the second largest most spoken language in the US. That is why every time that you see a new political campaign, guess who these politicians are trying to speak in Espanol? We have Obama, we have all these presidents who wanted to be sympathizers with the Latinx community in the US. So right now, we're looking at 60 million Latinos in the US according to the Pew Center Research and Institute, and that's a lot of people, and that means that we're looking at close to 20% of the population of the United States who are Spanish speakers. That's really important because that gives Latinos or Chicanos the power for determining who's going to win any election. We'll continue to bring more facts about native Spanish speakers, Espanol, all about Spanish, because Espanol, believe it or not, it is claimed to the identity of those of us who live in the US. It's easy to understand the simple fact we're so close to Latin America. We have a border with Mexico, 2,000 miles, and down south you have about 600 million Latinx who historically have come in wave. So right after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, when the U.S. ended up taking the Southwest, there were about 75,000 Mexicanos, Spanish speakers, living in the U.S. So that's when we hear the expression that borderline crossed them. So, and that's how you have all those names in Spanish here in California, Arizona, all the way to Texas. That's how we have Los Angeles, San Diego, and there's so many words today that English have taken from Spanish, tons of them, from the beginning of Anglo-Americans clashing culturally with the Mexican population. Now, if we go back to the first 5 decades of the 1900s, most of the people coming from Latin America into the U.S. were Mexico. And we explained this, or Professor Jacobo in one of his good video lectures was talking about the push and pull factors. So the first 5 decades of the 1900s, we deal with this push and pull factors. Pushing means that Mexicans were pushed out of Mexico. We have a civil war. You have la Revolución Mexicana, that about 1 million Mexicanos came in the first 2 decades of the 1900s. Then you also have a decline of jobs and the stock market crashes in the 1930s. Then you have a push factor. The U.S. now is pushing Mexicanos out of the U.S. But then we also have pull factors that are based on economics. Because every time we have an economic growth, you have a lot of people coming because it's the land of opportunities. Sometimes, not all the time. So for a long time, the first 5 decades is Mexicanos coming into the U.S. But then when we get to the 1970s and 80s, we have a domino effect of civil wars in Central America. The U.S. is really in Central America participating in these wars because we're afraid that the Russians are taking over. We're fighting against communism and we're supporting all these nations, but at the same time, we're causing a lot of crime, a lot of violence, and so we have tons of Salvadorians, Guatemalans, Nicaraguans coming into the U.S. And that really a massive flow of exodus of Central Americans in the last 2 decades, from, well, like you say, from late 1970s all the way up to 1990s. Simple fact that Reagan had to provide amnesty to about 3 million people, and a lot of them were Mexicans and Central Americans who took advantage of the amnesty, and these people were provided with permanent resident cards. At that time it was called the alien cards, and that is one of the, and I wanted to say probably that is one of the last amnesty given to undocumented or unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. Now, if we look at the 1960s, we have a flow of Cubans, and that's when Fidel Castro is fighting against the U.S. And then you have all these freedom flights where Lyndon B. Johnson helps to rescue all those Cubans who wants to leave Cuba. And we have a mass flow of Cubans coming into Miami and also coming into New York. And the second wave of Cubans happens in the 1980s, and that's called the Marielitos. If you ever saw the movie Scarface by Al Pacino, it really talks about the second wave of Cubanos, Cubans into Miami. Then we see Colombians coming by hundreds of thousands in the 90s because of the civil war in Colombia. Then, as we're talking right now, Venezuelans continues to come. So what I'm trying to get at is that we have consistently having Spanish speakers coming into the US, making it, like I mentioned before, the largest population. And aside from Colombia and Argentina and Mexico, happens to be the largest nation with more native Spanish speakers. And that causes a lot of problems, because then you have a movement that has been here in place for a long time, and that is known as the English only movement. And I know in 2016, if you remember, Donald Trump, he said that in America you only speak English. And so he was embracing the English only movement, which is something that is really old, because we can go to 1750s and we have one of the U.S. founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, who was fearful for the growing of German immigrants. He thought that they were going to take over and then English was going to be removed from the U.S. And you also in the early 1900s, you have U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. He also mentioned that we only have room for one language, and that is English. So this rhetoric of the English only movement has been here for a long, long time. So this movement is driven mostly by hostility towards immigrants and large numbers of immigrants, which most of them are coming from Latin America. As a matter of fact, most of the bilingual programs that we have in the US, 75% targets Latinos, which is the Spanish language. And we have so many programs created for Latinos, dual enrollment, ESL, ELD, all these great programs that try to support these Spanish speakers so they can adapt, learn the English language, and they can also contribute to society. But many people see language as a threat. As a matter of fact, we have only 32, well, that's more than half of the states in the US, that have English as the official language. Basically, this means that the government of those states have to offer all their information and documentation in English. And they are also obliged to provide information in other language when it comes down to health or public safety issues. It's mandated by the law. But there have been many attempts to make English the official language by law, but it has failed. The last one was in 2005 by Republican Congressman Steve Kim, and he submitted something called the English Language Unity Act, but that did not go anywhere. It was not really supported, in the U.S. Congress and the Senate. So right now, we do not really have an official language. It's most of the business are conducted here in the U.S. in English, but then we enjoy the freedom of all these many languages. And that's all. It's really important to understand that our contribution, not only in Spanish but in food, music, have enriched this country. We've been here for a long, long time, and we're not going away. So either you accept how we are here, embrace us, make the best of our beautiful, rich culture because we're very diversified. And that's something that I wanted to talk a little bit because when we talk about, let's say, Cubans and Mexicanos, the only thing in common they have is the Spanish. We are very diverse when it comes down to culture. Colombians are very different. Argentinos are very different. So you name it. But yeah, we have a common denominator. It is the colonial legacy of Spain that continues to permeate in these rich nations of Latin America that now are moving into the US or they have been moving in here and they also have altered and changed the culture in the US to some extent. I hope you enjoyed this. These are just cool facts about where are we and I think we're continuing to grow and we're not going to stop growing, I think. All right, that's all for now. Take care.